George Orwell's 1984, published in 1949, is one of the most profound and well-known works of dystopian literature. In this video, we're going to discuss the impact of 1984, the motivation behind 1984, as well as the novel's lasting impact. Now, first and foremost, when we're talking about 1984, I have this particular copy. This is a great copy published by Books and Coffee. Regarding the context of 1984, I will point everyone to George Orwell's inspiration behind 1984, which was actually a novel called We by a Russian author named Yevgeny Zamyatin, which, if you read it, is similar in context, in style, in sort of the historical dystopia that both each of these novels take place in. However, I will say that the dystopian tragedy surrounding We versus 1984 is a little bit different. You can see that George Orwell did not exactly copy, Zamyatin's We, but sort of the overall character arc in terms of how it is involved with the dystopian society is very similar. Sort of the dystopian motivations behind the dystopian overrulers is similar in each novel. So just a little bit of a fun little Easter egg for George Orwell readers that might not be familiar with Zamyatin. I definitely point everybody to this original. Let me take the sticky note off. The original inspiration behind George Orwell's 1984 was indeed Yevgeny Zamyatin's We. And obviously I took lots of sticky notes for 1984, but I think it's important to not have my nose buried in the book the entire time. We have a really good set of notes here that we're going to be referencing. And when we're talking about 1984, I think it's important to put it in the context of the time period. Obviously, a lot of Orwell's sort of dystopian visions did not end up coming true. And despite how serious 1984 was, it was meant to be sort of a satire, a tongue-in-cheek sort of nod to authors like Jonathan Swift, perhaps. And sort of this video is going to be broken down into sort of the introduction, just to give everybody a little bit of their bearings. Then we're going to get into part one, which is sort of a in-depth place to sort of get to sort of the topical themes behind George Orwell's 1984. Some key terms to remember will be in the introduction as well. Part two, we are going to get further into sort of the plot and the ideologies behind 1984. By the time we get to part three, we're going to discuss some parts. I hope you all will stick around till part three to sort of hear some analysis behind 1984 and George Orwell that probably have not been discussed as well as much, I should say. So 1984, let's discuss a little bit of it. It was obviously one of the most popular dystopian novels, along with Animal Farm, and we sort of see George Orwell entering new territory, dystopian territory, sort of tragic territory. 1984, in terms of its reader base, in terms of its cultural impact, obviously is not considered a satire. It tends to be taken fairly seriously in terms of literature analysis, literature responses, and sort of the cultural impact that 1984 still plagues us with in some ways, very, very dystopian political society that we still live in to this day. Obviously, the sort of the context, the vocabulary, the ideologies that exist in 1984 still live with us on a socio-political level since the novel was published. So discussing 1984, just a few key terms rather to be aware of. You're going to see these little catchphrases that come up in 1984. For example, INGSOC, which stands for English Socialism, sort of that controls the proletarian underclass of the 1984 universe. Key term number two is Newspeak, which is sort of the controlled, manufactured vocabulary / language that has been implemented onto the proletariats, the working class, the underclass, by Big Brother. Obviously, I'll explain a little bit more about Big Brother. Furthermore, in terms of the propaganda surrounding 1984 is going to be the 2-minute hate, which is sort of the propaganda-filled, infused broadcast that take place on the telescreen, which not unlike sort of the propaganda that we see in the news today. However, these are basically just little 2-minute propaganda speeches by Big Brother, the cult of Big Brother, to sort of facilitate the cult of personality and the political motivations to sort of further empower Big Brother. So just a few key terms. There's quite a few. We're working on some coffee this morning. Hope that's all right with you all. Some more important facts of 1984 in terms of the overall universe are concerned is that the geography of 1984 centers around 3 superstates known as Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia, which are in constant warfare, at least we're led to believe. And Winston Smith, our main protagonist, we'll get more into him as the novel unfolds. But basically, the overall narrative of 1984 is not only a sort of a dystopian, esoteric tragedy, but it's also how a character, a protagonist, that being Winston Smith, comes into direct conflict with sort of the socio-political regime, the propaganda machine that is Big Brother, and how he initially attempts to resist, but is then sort of mentally and sociologically, politically controlled and broken in order to serve the bigger slave class of Big Brother, as we might say. 1984's protagonist, Winston Smith, lives in a dystopian London ruled by political and social propaganda, as we said, by Big Brother. Now, Winston also begins to keep a diary in the beginning of the novel, and we sort of get this idea that Winston Smith is this sort of heroic anti-Big Brother rebel that is sort of resisting the political regime of Big Brother. And so far as the first quarter half of the novel is concerned, that is what we do along with Winston Smith. We are sort of on this journey to see if Winston Smith is going to be able to uncover anything about Big Brother, the big conspiracy, or if he's able to sort of resist the political authoritarian oppression of Big Brother. So Winston Smith also works for the Ministry of Truth. We'll talk a little bit more about what his role is there. And he sort of has this, basically what Winston Smith's job is for the Ministry of Truth is sort of this, he's sort of like a disinformation agent to sort of revise history. And he sort of works for Big Brother, does the dirty work for Big Brother to attempt to sort of rewrite the history that existed before and after Big Brother's sort of authoritarian control. They want to sort of erase all the history. They want to sort of erase the books. They're working on this new language called Newspeak. So very, very profound. The level that the Big Brother is willing to go in terms of socio-political revisionist history is something that comes up quite a bit in here. And make of that what you will. I think even in modern times, we're sort of suffering a somewhat of a, if not a revisionist history, sort of a canceled revisionist history rather, where certain monuments are being removed, and the history classes in school are totally different than they once were. And I think we're getting farther and farther from the actual message of history, and we can sort of see that history is sort of becoming often revised for social and political gain, unfortunately, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum. Now, as far as Winston Smith working for the Ministry of Truth is concerned, we also have some other socio-political propaganda groups that sort of are sort of all covertly operating together to sort of push the agenda of Big Brother. And we have the Ministry of Truth, which sort of controls the historical revisionist propaganda / entertainment in this dystopian universe of London. Second, we have the Ministry of Peace, which sort of controls the propaganda of warfare and getting everybody to sort of raise their fist for Big Brother, what have you. And thirdly, we have the Ministry of Love, which sort of promotes the propaganda and sort of controls the psychological and emotional dedication to Big Brother, as well as monitoring the general population's sexuality through pornography, mind control, relationship control, etc. And fourthly, we have the Ministry of Plenty, which sort of covertly controls the food source, the rations, the economics, basically anything that comes on Winston Smith's dinner plate at work or at home is basically sort of covertly controlled by the Ministry of Plenty, and everybody is drinking Victory Gin, and the coffee is really bad, the food's really bad. It's almost like they're all living in this dystopian prison with terrible food and terrible beverages, but nobody really knows it. They know, but they're just so sort of beaten down and sort of controlled by Big Brother that they don't realize how bad things are actually becoming. But on some level, these characters are aware that they wish to rebel against Big Brother, and that's sort of where the story sort of begins. Basically, the narrative sort of starts with Winston's reflections on his family's past, the London he used to know as a child, growing up in starvation, not enough food. He had some tensions at home with his parents. He was sort of this ravenously hungry young child. And as a result of Big Brother, his family was basically starving. And he talks about how he tried to steal all the food from his little sister, and his mother would try to coerced young Winston Smith to share some food with his mother. There's not really much on Winston Smith's father, unfortunately, but we are led to sort of assume that he grew up in an absent-fathered home. So sort of continuing with the narrative, while working for the Ministry of Truth, Winston catches the eye of Julia, whom he believes is an agent working for Big Brother to try to coerce and sort of harm Winston in some way, sort of manipulate him. Big Brother has, the reason he thinks this, and the reason that George Orwell tends to be so paranoid, is because Big Brother implements what is also known as the thought police, and they can sort of control your thoughts through the telecomputer or the telescreen, and sort of covertly spy on your intentions, your feelings, your reactions, your true feelings and thoughts about Big Brother. Sure enough, Big Brother will find out about that. Now, when we're discussing Big Brother, I think it's important to remember that although Big Brother is shown in various images, various forms of propaganda throughout the novel, he's sort of seen as this mustached, almost Hitler-esque, Stalin-esque type of character. But in essence, Big Brother is not meant to be viewed as one individual itself. Big Brother is more like a totalitarian idea, sort of a collective entity, a pseudo president, a pseudo entity, if you will, that sort of puts a face to the name and the ideologies of Big Brother. Any form of propaganda needs sort of a celebrity behind it, at least a face, something easily recognizable to sort of continue the lineage of propaganda that Big Brother wishes to sort of accomplish. So they do that with not only the telescreen or the telecomputer. I'm getting telescreen, telecomputer mixed up. I think it is the telescreen. And obviously we have the 2-minute hate, we have the posters that are all over the various ministries, we have the radio in some cases which broadcast propaganda for Big Brother. So just all around, not so uncommon to how the media sort of oftentimes takes stances politically for or against certain political opponents or political candidates to sort of push not only a political agenda, but also a sort of a socio-political agenda. So subsequently, as a result of Winston Smith believing that he's being stalked covertly by not only Julia, but sort of the thought police, he ends up finding out that she's actually not working for the thought police, and she's actually attempting to rebel against Big Brother as well, just like Winston is, and they actually form a bond, a friendship, and then they end up falling in love. Now, unfortunately, the title of this video was Dystopian Tragedy. We'll talk a little bit more about what happens with Julia and Winston. Now, I'm going to try not to give away too many spoilers. Hopefully, you all will read this novel for yourselves. So we see there's sort of like a little ounce of hope, because in this dystopian hell, in this dystopian turmoil, where there's actually some hope of love, of a relationship, budding, character retribution, character arcs rather. So we do have some moments of beauty. I mean, George Orwell is a beautiful writer, the way that he describes the different, scenes of making love between Julia and Winston, and sort of the way that he writes about these characters' hopes in the face of this dystopian oppression rather. So getting into book 2 now, we have our main protagonist, Winston Smith, has not only befriended Julia and fallen in love with her, but he's also befriended this other individual named O'Brien, who we believe is a friend of Winston, gives the protagonist a secret briefcase with a clandestine book called The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Control. Now, this book is sort of a pseudo-rebellion book by the Brotherhood and Emmanuel Goldstein. Now, just real quick, the Brotherhood is sort of this pseudo fake entity group created by Big Brother, in fact, that the characters are led to believe is this real sort of covert rebellion group that's working against Big Brother. Lo and behold, obviously the Brotherhood was created by Big Brother as a form of sort of controlled opposition. Yeah, it sort of functions as kind of like we have on YouTube today, where political pundits or candidates will sort of use various social media platforms to sort of promote and at least get a sense of who's following them, who's voting for them, that sort of thing. Now, this book was written by Emmanuel Goldstein, the character is sort of a sit-in for the Russian revolutionist Leon Trotsky, from what I understand. And sort of Leon Trotsky was used as a model by Winston to sort of create this Emmanuel Goldstein character. Emmanuel Goldstein also appears on the telescreen, and Big Brother uses this idea of the Brotherhood to sort of entrap the proletariats. Now, I keep saying this word proletariats, which is actually an ancient Roman word, but basically the proletariats, or the proles for short, is basically everybody in the novel that is under the authoritarian oppression of Big Brother. Basically like the regular citizens, the working class, the underclass, the poor people, the underdogs are all the proles. So when I say proles and proletariats, you'll kind of know a little bit more what I'm talking about. So obviously, little does Winston know that Emmanuel Goldstein, as well as the book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Control, is sort of a pseudo-political enemy that's sort of covertly working to sort of entrap him, right? Now, very similarly to Big Brother itself, Emmanuel Goldstein is sort of a pseudo-entity, a non-entity, sort of a political face, a political pundit that is sort of used to sort of garner controlled opposition. And that's sort of how Big Brother entraps people. One of the reasons, along with the thought police, along with the 2-minute hate, along with all the sort of covert spying that goes on between the different ministries within the universe of Big Brother. So sort of going a little bit further ahead here, after the brief and passionate love affair between Julia and Winston, these characters start to accept their fate, Julia and Winston, because they know that they're being covertly spied on, they know they're being followed, and they know that their passionate but very, very dangerous rebellion is very brief. They know that it cannot go on because the power of Big Brother is just so overwhelmingly powerful. Unfortunately, as a result, they become captured and discovered by Big Brother. O'Brien himself actually turns Winston Smith into Big Brother, where he is brought to the infamous Room 101 by O'Brien, where he is subsequently tortured and broken. Winston also, however, under duress, obviously, Winston throws Julia under the bus when he is confronted with rats. They basically bring him to this torture room known as Room 101, and they give him various forms of mind control and physical beatings, so on and so forth. When he finally sees the next torture device, which is going to be rats, he has this horrible reaction to it. He always hated rats, is what Orwell tells us, and he actually ends up saying, do this to Julia, don't do this to me. So we can kind of see the extent of the tragedy that takes place between Winston Smith and Julia, that he is willing to throw her under the bus completely to avoid being tortured by rats. So it's pretty upsetting, pretty profound, and just kind of makes your skin crawl. So obviously throughout these different occurrences in the novels, there's obviously some other characters that I haven't mentioned. There's some other political theories and analogies that come up. There's some really intense, meaningful, profound dialogue. But in a nutshell, Winston is essentially, he comes out of the torture ritual, sort of a brainwashed a proletarian, basically a pawn for Big Brother, and he looks at the poster of Big Brother and he says, "Yes, now I love Big Brother." And it was so chilling when you get to the final chapters of the book because you know essentially what's going to happen. Now Julia kind of drifts off into the story. He didn't really exactly tell us exactly what took place with Julia, but I definitely recommend. We're going to get into some of the sort of the lesser known questions that I have about 1984 at the end of this video here, but I definitely encourage people to take notes when you're reading 1984. Definitely encourage rereadings. Maybe we'll come back to this in a year or two and I'll have an even better understanding of it. But obviously, not only is 1984 a sort of a dystopian esoteric tragedy, it's also a warning to up and coming political regimes as well as the public to sort of question the people you're voting for, right? Sort of question the political system, the economic system, the financial system, the banking system, even perhaps, that sort of works in and around politics to sort of control and manipulate, possibly control and manipulate the general population. So in terms of dystopia, obviously 1984 is one of the most well discussed. We did mention, We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. I definitely encourage everybody to read that. Let me give you guys a little bit of an overview of this. Set in the 26th century AD, Zamyatin's masterpiece describes life in a regimented totalitarian society of one state. So that's kind of similar to Big Brother, ruled over by the all-powerful benefactor. That's kind of like Big Brother right there. The inspiration for George Orwell's 1984, we is the archetype of the modern dystopia or anti-utopia. A great prose poem detailing the fate that might befall us all if we surrender our individual selves to some collective dream of technology and fail in the vigilance that is the price of freedom. Now, I will mention that if you want to sort of tackle Zamyatin's We, it's much more esoteric than George Orwell. It's much more cryptic. It's a little harder to read. Obviously, it's translated from Russian. This book was actually banned until 1988 by the Russian, political system. So this is a dangerous book, right? Politically speaking. Not sure our boy Putin would be very thrilled with this book, but compared to George Orwell, I will say it's a little bit more difficult to read, but it does kind of help you get your bearings. It's interesting to see where George Orwell got his inspiration. You can kind of compare Zamyatin and Orwell and sort of compare their political ideologies, which of them had sort of the more accurate outcome, the more relevant outcome. Obviously, we have Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. We have Infinite Jest, which we're actually reading currently, which is also another dystopian, loosely dystopian sort of postmodern narrative. So that's kind of an interesting genre that I've been interested in tackling. But anyway, getting back to George Orwell, I'm rambling. We're going to discuss some of the other things that I left out in the overall analysis there, or plot summary rather. Winston Smith suffers from horrible varicose ulcers. Now, this is a potential symptom for the oppression of Big Brother and how it's affecting the pros or affecting our protagonist Winston on a physical level. However, George Orwell suffered ill health throughout his life, and he was quite ill during the writing of 1984. And I think it's kind of like when I get migraines, that's a form of stress-induced anxiety, stress-induced depression. I'm not saying it's a direct result of being a prole, being in the working class, but I'm sure that plays a role in the migraines, as well as George Orwell's varicose ulcer, and it's constantly itching him. It's causing an annoyance. And in the beginning of the novel, I think that is sort of serving as a hint. George Orwell is telling us is that not all is well with Winston Smith, and that this dystopian prison system that he's living under, social prison system rather, is affecting him. Also, we have this sort of esoteric nursery rhyme that comes up from George Orwell's childhood that sort of goes, sort of the main hook is, oranges and lemons say the bells of St. Clemens. And this has been led to believe sort of symbolizes lost innocence in the world before Big Brother. And Winston Smith seems to kind of use this nursery rhyme whenever he hears it it sort of teleports him mentally back to a sort of an infantile state where he can remember, just barely remember, the world and society before the totalitarian control of Big Brother. This is something else that comes up with George Orwell, is Orwell's possible paramilitary intelligence connection. Now, I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. I'll leave that to the professionals. But there are some things that come up in George Orwell's sort of work history, if you will, and his family work history. Orwell's father, Rochard Wallamsley Blair, worked for the expansion of the British Empire in the 1800s and became a member of the Indian Civil Service as an opium agent to transport opium to China. So George Orwell's father was kind of like a opium agent, sort of dispersing and selling and distributing opium to the Indian population. A little suspect, in my opinion. The purpose of this was for the British Empire in India to profit from a monopoly over narcotics at the expense of the Indian farmers and agriculture. So not only a little unethical, just a little sketchy. You know, George Orwell's father was sort of a government agent, drug dealer, if you will, kind of interesting. And Orwell himself, later in life, served as an agent of the Imperial Police stationed in Burma, and also went to the Spanish Civil War to fight the fascists and was wounded. Later in the 40s, Orwell worked as a writer, announcer for British Broadcasting Company, promoting propaganda for India during World War II. So we have obviously some paramilitary, military-industrial complex connections in the universe of George Orwell, which I don't think anybody's really maybe mentioned. Maybe they have. If anybody has, let me know in the comment section. So I hope you guys enjoyed our little review / commentary of 1984. Definitely recommend it. I will say that it has some maybe boring parts that are kind of a slog. You know, we're going to probably do a rereading, and maybe we'll kind of, sort of explore the notes that we took a little bit more regarding 1984. But we sort of have I think we can all relate to 1984 because it is so politically, viscerally shocking. I mean, I think, there's sort of this fear or sort of this idea that certain political candidates that we have are going to, put us in a dystopian Orwellian world or a Huxleyan, Aldous Huxleyan world. Sort of this idea of dystopian control and dystopian authoritarianism sort of is used as a form of fear mongering, fear porn in itself. And I think if we take it too seriously, we are going to be politically paranoid, right? I guess that kind of makes sense. And I think it's important to not, although George Orwell's book was sort of meant to be sort of a Swiftian, Jonathan Swiftian satire, it's awfully tragic, and I think it kind of makes our skin crawl in the times that we're living in now, just because of the political influence that not necessarily the president has, but sort of like the people that work for the president have, sort of the totalitarian-esque way that was handled. For example, I hate to use that word because they'll probably bury my video if I do, but the Kokonka virus, we'll say, the sort of the authoritarian control that the overrulers of the Kokonkan virus were able to implement, that's very Orwellian in my opinion. Sort of the attack on free speech is very Orwellian. Sort of the insistence that you get the Kokonkan shot and kind of do what we tell you to do, stand in line and vote for us, do what we say. Big Brother's watching, Kinko Gates is watching, Kinko Musk is watching you with his his little spyware, and he's going to be working for the new political system. But anyway, very interesting sort of way to interpret 1984. I was kind of, just a little comedy there for you at the end. But how do we interpret 1984 in the times that we're living in now? And I think you'll have to read and find out for yourself. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we'll see everybody in the next one.